second session. And we'd like to welcome Nicola Dixon from the Isle of Man. And Nicola lives in Peel on the west side of the Isle of Man, so on a clear day she can see us. She could wave, maybe if we stood on top of Slieve Donard, you know. So I've always wanted to go to the Isle of Man and really loved hearing about the archaeology and the sites she's mentioning to us. Nicola started off as an artist in the traditional boat world, but the Isle of Man gave her a special focus for her paintings. And she represented the Isle of Man at the festival Interceltique de Lorient in France. I think it's Brittany, isn't that right? Yeah. Which is an area we need to feature in future conferences, I think. And she was inspired by Manx designer Archibald Knox and the lorica, the Deer's Cry, or St. Patrick's breastplate, which we've heard a little bit about previously in the conference. So St. Patrick's been a big influence, so it's great to welcome her to St. Patrick's Town and tell us about her art. Thank you, Nicola.
Elements today. So I thought one of my triskells would be a rather good sort of way of introducing the talk. I'm talking about my work and the work of Manx designer Archibald Knox, because he's been a really big influence upon my work, and the Deer's Cry, that's otherwise known as St. Patrick's breastplate, because Archibald Knox used that for his masterwork, and I in turn have been inspired by Archibald Knox and also the Deer's Cry, but via a slightly different route. And this image this is a Manx Nicky going around the edge, and I thought that's a bit like me dancing around the edge of all of this. So to start, I know what I was going to say. To start off with, I started off with an academic background and had big plans on saving the world, but the universe had other plans for me, and I instead of going to my graduation ceremony in sort of geography and anthropology, I went sailing and returned had post-viral fatigue, and things went in a different direction. I came back to the Isle of Man and got a job on the island and started to learn all about Archibald Knox at that time. So it's a kind of a weaving story, rather like the Triskel. So we have Archibald Knox. He was a designer born in 1864 and died in 1933. He was of Scottish origin and was born on the island to a family of mechanical of engineers, and he didn't go into the family firm working in engineering, unlike the rest of his brothers. He became an artist and an art teacher, and he studied the Manx crosses. He was very much into the archaeology of the island. He went to Douglas Art School and then became a teacher at Douglas School of Art, and he then went to teach in London. Teaching was a big part of his life, and in a way he sort of taught me from beyond his grave, because I had a craft background rather than a painting and drawing background. He is most famous for being a designer for Liberty of London. He was a ghost designer. They didn't actually credit their designers at the time. You can sort of see his work. It's usually got Tudoric or Cymric printed on it. That's not his name, but he designed a lot of the work. And now the belief is that he's designed about 5,000 things for Liberty. artifacts coming out all the time. Hopefully there's a big book coming out soon with lots of information in. He also did a lot of works on paper, and that's the deer's cry. But anyway, firstly, going back to my story. So I come back to the Isle of Man and I get a job with the jewellers, and there's not many Knox resources on the island. He's very much under-celebrated on the island. There's moves now to improve, to increase his knowledge on the island. I forgot to mention, he was a deeply spiritual man, and he was a Mason, and he was a bit of a mystic, so this kind of informs his work as well. Okay, so back to so I came back, I got a job in a jewellery shop. I was making my own jewellery at university as a sort of a side hustle, painted wooden jewellery, and I would mine the sort of often black and white resources for little motifs that I could use in my own work. One from the top here, the top of this spoon, is one that I used a lot in my work. And then this was another piece that I found. Any book that had Archibald Knox work in it, I would buy. And this was another one that I used in my jewellery. So this is the wooden jewellery that I made, and it was all sort of painted wood, and I did this for quite a long time, and I supplied the Manx Museum, and it was really sought after, actually. It just took forever. And what was next? Oh yeah, I worked in this jewellery shop with a guy called Tony Lewis, and he had also sort of mined the Knox archive for imagery, and a lot of the jewellery that I was cleaning up in the jewellery shop were these sort of pieces, which sort of fried my brains a bit in their construction. And this is a page from the Deer's Cry, and I think this was by Knox that Tony used, and I think this was one that was found in the bin by Knox's students. He left he was teaching in London, and he was criticised by by the school inspectors for encouraging students to express their own individuality, which was sort of against the thinking of the time. So he resigned, threw a load of papers in the bin, which his students rescued, and that's how we know that he was working on it in 1912. Anyway, so this was one of the papers, and it's quite astonishing, the artwork. So this was another one of the papers, Deer's Cry, that I used. There was a book that was published of some of the pages of the Deer's Cry in 1983, the 50th anniversary of Knox's birth. And this was another one. At this point, I wasn't really into the whole religion thing at all. So I just kind of looked at the pretty pictures and the lines, and their sort of underlying spirituality didn't mean that much to me, but it was just amazing. So I thought at this point, I'll talk a little bit about the Deer's Cry itself. It's kind of, there's so many different elements weaving through, it's just how to get it through into a form. The Deer's Cry itself, I've since found out, it's a lorica. It's got many things. Words of power is one of its ways. It was first referred to in the 7th century, but it was attributed to St. Patrick, and I think the first reference to it in writing was in the 11th century, and it was then translated into English in 1911. And Knox probably came across this sort of work because his cousin in Scotland was a collector of incantations in Scotland. The Carmina Gadelica was by his cousin, which may or might not mean something to you. So Knox was also into the Book of Kells, as well as the sort of Manx crosses. We've got over 100 Manx crosses on the island, and he went through the Manx crosses. He studied them and wrote about them. So at this point, I'll go through the Deer's Cry by the part that I've used for my work, to give you a flavour of Knox's work. So this is, I bind myself today to the virtue of heaven. You see that he had this sort of complex Celtic interlace with the words all woven inside. And you had to sort of really look to find the words. And it's sort of described as a sort of, it must have been a meditation in him doing it as well as in the viewing of it. But it was not for public view. He says he spent 20 years doing this and it was incomplete at his death. Okay, so I bind myself today through virtue of heaven, in light of sun, in brightness of snow, in splendor of fire, in speed of lightning, in swiftness of wind, in depth of the sea, in stability of earth, in compactness of rock. And I always feel that the energy shifts a little bit in the room when you say the words, and that's sort of the words of power. And this is sort of what I felt when I worked with this work later on. And there, the Deer's Cry actually has eight stanzas, and this is the one that's about nature. And this sort of is the link between paganism and Christianity. Sort of pagan beliefs matched Christianity in its sort of Irish Celtic Christianity. So there was sort of a mix, and it's very much the I'm not even going to go to my notes. They sort of described it almost as the inner membrane of our sort of the lives meeting. I've got that wrong, but anyway, the two belief systems kind of matched and blended within the Deer's Cry at St. Patrick's breastplate. And the eight stanzas, there's two about the Trinity, about Christ's life, about it's calling in the angels, and there's sort of archangels. Then there's one about all the evils that you've got to sort of be protected against. What was next? Oh yeah. So yeah, and there's all different translations of the Deer's Cry as well, which all comes in later. Anyway, going back to me, I did all this Celtic stuff on the island, which was great, but I also sailed, and I then got involved in the sailing world, and I started to crew on yachts and go to sailing events, and travelled around the world. I exhibited in America and the Caribbean, and got quite well known for that, actually. And I came back to the Isle of Man, and sort of life went a bit squirrely for a while, and I got to a point where I just couldn't paint, and it was actually getting really serious. And I was thinking maybe I had to give up being an artist because I just couldn't paint anymore. So I kind of thought, right, I'm going to have to work on this. And so I started doing all sorts of random stuff. I went on a whole spiritual journey, really. And I went to healers, and I went to did work with shamans, therapists, art journaling, all sorts. And it started to open my mind to the fact that actually the art wasn't me that was creating it. It was something that was kind of moving through me. So I wasn't sort of responsible for it. I just kind of had to almost open the channels. And part of this process was I went on a meditation retreat to Yorkshire, and it's the first one I'd ever done, and I kind of went there. It was just like the universe was kicking my ass, it has to be said. And so I just went. I sort of put the check through to the person I had to late at night, and I went, right, I'm going. And I was in this room meditating, and suddenly all this Celtic knotwork started moving and forming in my head, somewhat like this earlier sketch from a sketchbook that I found, and it was just like forming, and it was just moving and just moving. It was a really cool experience. So anyway, I was starting to kind of feel better with all of this stuff, and I came back to the Isle of Man from that, and I was feeling a bit braver, and it was coming up to the anniversary of Knox's death, 150th anniversary of his birth, it would have been. There was a big exhibition on the Isle of Man, and I had to revisit my Celtic work because it was going to be exhibited alongside Macintosh and Knox and things, and that was a really cool thing. And I thought, well, maybe I'm onto something here. So, and I was also then asked to produce some educational resources for the exhibition. So I then looked back at knot construction and came up with some real cool little techniques. And I was then asked to design a logo for our Inter-Celtic Festival. And I had designed a triskel for somebody previously who had a company called Triskel Productions, and he didn't actually use the logo. Thanks, Lenny. So I had it pinned up going, I know this is a really good one. So I then started working with the triskel, and I lost 3 days just constructing, making more and more complex constructions around the triple spiral, just really as a sort of a symbolic form. I didn't really know anything about its meaning. I know there's big gaps, isn't it? You think from the Isle of Man I would know this. So yeah, and then I did this, and then all these drawings, and then I went on a weekend with some friends who were sort of healers and shamans, and I was talking to Maggie, and I was describing my process with all of this, and she said, you will be sort of reintegrating yourself doing that. And it sort of felt sort of what was going on. And there's a load of other weird stuff went on that weekend, like a medium came up to me and said she had a message from spirit from me, and it was just, it has been quite a journey. So anyway, I did that. And then for years I've done the artwork for our traditional boat weekend. So I then did this one, and these are all boats that would come to the weekend. This is Peel around the outside, and this is St Patrick's Isle, because there's history with St Patrick on the Isle of Man, but that comes in a little bit later. And I was working on this, and I met the shaman friend, and he said, the central part of the triskel is really important. That's the still, silent part. So I started looking into the triskel, and just went, oh right, okay, the sort of the powers of 3, the triple spirals, the energy going in and out, mother, maiden, crone, land, sea, sky, all meanings come into it, and then you have the still, silent centre. So that was cool. It was all, all the little pieces were coming together. And so anyway, the other thing that I took on, I kind of do like scaring myself, was to represent the Ireland Festival Inter-Celtic de Lorient. It was a big exhibition. I hadn't actually done a big exhibition for about 15 years. I did one in America of my America work, but it was just kind of like, right, Nick, you're going to have to do it. So it was a bit like I was in the scriptorium, really. Again, it was just like, right, into the attic, get this one sorted. And I did feel physically ill for quite a long time doing it. Anyway, I picked up a copy of Anam Cara by John O'Donoghue, and opened on page 3, as I recall. And there was another translation of the Deer's Cry. Instead of I bind myself today, which is Knox's one, it was I arise today. And that matched, it was very much aligned with the type of meditation that I'd been doing. And it was the nature verse of the Deer's Cry that John O'Donoghue talked about. It's a cracking book, Anam Cara. Highly recommend it if you don't know. And John O'Donoghue generally. So I thought, right. And actually, in the same chapter, each day as a journey came up, and that inspired the first image that you saw. So I thought, I arise today. So I then did the Deer's Cry, or the 9 lines from the Deer's Cry in triskells. I didn't refer to Knox's work because it will fry my brains, but I just used my sort of quite intuitive flowing line that I had sort of mastered really by doing all the sailing work, drawing the sails, because I worked in classic yachts, really beautiful lines on the boats, and the sort of description of if it looks right, it is right, which is very much how I worked. So here is my first Deer's Cry. I arise today through strength of heaven, light of sun, radiance of moon, splendour of fire, speed of lightning, swiftness of wind, depth of the sea, stability of earth, and compactness of rock. And then that was the 9 hanging. But, the energy changing is so cool. So, I was in this room in Lorient, and I'd be saying it out and feeling the energy and going, oh, yeah, that's interesting. And there was other triskells that I'd done as well, and one lady was coming up to me saying, oh, yeah, I'm having visions from your triskells. And it was like, I'm onto something, but I don't know what it is, really. And... yeah, it was great. So I was very happy about that. Anyway, what was next? Oh yeah, I came back to the island, and the Triskells, they were building a new mental health unit on the island, and I was asked to do some artwork on quite a strict brief for the foyer, and they wanted around the edges to be able to use for fabrics and things within the unit was the idea. It wasn't done in the end. And then the corner pieces were the different sort of wards we were in the unit. So I did all the edge and had a great time doing that. That was very much within my comfort zone. And for this, because I'd been doing all the shamanic stuff, I did a Celtic medicine wheel. So you have earth, air, fire and water round the sides, and then spring, summer, autumn, winter around the sides. And it was also around Manannan. And they just kind of wanted, Manannan was the god of the Isle of Man, Manannan MacLear. And also his symbol was the Triskelion, and that's possibly part of the origin of the three legs of man, the symbol of the island. So I had to get into myth for this, and there's sort of there was two ideas with this, and I put them forward to the people in the unit, and I had a meeting with them. Luckily, I was absolutely exhausted when I had this meeting. And a guy looked at my work and said, it reminds me of Van Gogh's The Scream. It actually meant Munch's The Scream. But it was incredibly rude, but actually he was bang on, because that's how I was feeling. And I'd had some other teaching about the energy that you put into the work is what shines out. And I'd been going, I don't know what to do in the middle. Anyway, I did this much calmer work and made sure that I was calm whenever I painted it because of this sort of environment that it was going into. And then my next project, because of all the energy stuff, the post office got in touch with me and said that we want to do a set of stamps to promote food and farming on the Isle of Man, but about how food and farming have the energy of the Isle of Man in the food. So yeah, I did this lot, and it was a really cool process. I used to collect stamps as a kid, so it was a real privilege. And I got to design the Frank mark, first day cover mark, and it's got a little Triskelion here with a seed in the centre and a growing shoot and a bud and a leaf around it. And then this is a land triskel, as I call it. And it's like a Triskelion in the landscape. And these are like the first class stamps for the Isle of Man for the year. And these images are still used to promote Manx food and farming. So the next project, this is Peel on the Isle of Man. And this is actually St. Patrick's Isle. And I live right kind of there in the middle. And there was a big regeneration project on the island. And it was quite sort of controversial. And I was asked to design some metalwork. And I thought, oh yeah, that'll be interesting. And I was walking blindly into these projects. And because people were not that thrilled with what's happening, or aspects of it, it was just kind of around about this area here. I thought, this has to be good, really have to nail it. I did feel physically sick for a long time working on this one, and I thought, right, what can I do? And I was floundering around looking for themes, and then I did a sort of Google, and I found that we had St. Patrick. I found reference to St. Patrick landing on the island in Peel. And there's all St. Patrick's Wells and things. Oh yeah, I forgot about St. Patrick and Peel. Yeah, St. Patrick's Isle, he's supposed to have landed here. Curlew's helped him. We've got Patrick Street. Patrick is the next door sort of county, as it were. And we have Patrick's Day used to be celebrated in Peel, and you couldn't switch your lights on in the evening. It was like that sort of hiring fair day. So decorate something around St. Patrick. And then I found reference to St. Patrick chanting the Deer's Cry to send Manannan on his way. And it's sort of like Ireland, we have this dance of sort of pagan and Christian beliefs. So that's what I did. My thing, I thought, right, Deer's Cry. But this time in metal. So it's in the centre of town. This is it through that church that I pointed out. And here it is closer up. So we have, oops, back again. I arise today through strength of heaven, light of sun, radiance of moon, splendour of fire, speed of lightning, swiftness of wind, depth of the sea, stability of earth, and firmness of rock again. So this is St. Patrick's Isle with the castle on it, and I thought this figure could either be St. Patrick or me wandering around the back of a castle looking at the view towards the mountains of Mourne, maybe. And then we have the symbol of Manannan. Oh yeah, I forgot a bit about the Deer's Cry. Going back to the Deer's Cry again, the Deer's Cry has two names. St. Patrick's breastplate, but another name is the Feth Fiada. And another meaning of the Feth Fiada is the cloak of invisibility that was used by Manannan to protect the Isle of Man. That was also used by St. Patrick to protect his followers at Tara. So I say it's this sort of weaving, interlacing thing. So yeah, in this work we have the history of fishing on the Isle of Man, of boats. We have sort of Viking boats, Manx, Nickies, Nobbies, herring drifters, different types of fishing boats and sailing boats. And then all the sort of nature of the island underneath. The town loved it. Great. I could live in Peel once more. So that was cool. Oh yeah, and then here it is. It throws a great shadow on the ground. Which is a real bonus, and it's lit so that there's shadows at night as well. So yeah, it's a really cool piece of work. As I said, I'm doing some more metalwork now for the local cathedral as well. I designed the work, and then a friend sort of translated it into digital files. So yeah, it's a really cool job. What was next? Oh yeah, next job. So then I get asked to exhibit with one of my childhood mentors, David Gilbert. He had died, but it was a big show, and I'd gone up to the farm as a child, and they had parrots and these magical sculptures up there, and we got a goat from them, and I just thought, right, I'm going to have to do some new work. I didn't have time to do too much work, but I thought new work, and I just sat down one evening, and I had this kind of flowing line from doing so much work, so much drawing for the Peel screens, that I just did this one evening. And in it we have, we have Polly the parrot there, and then sort of this little parrot emerged, Netta the goat, who was my little friend when I was young, and then one of David's sculptures there. And then I started doing more of this sort of line work, and this is the sort of thing that I'm wearing, where I just do this free-flowing line and then sort of Celticize it. And yeah, it's kind of going back to Archibald Knox. It's not steadfastly following his work. It's more sort of being inspired by it and doing it in my own way, which is very much, what I've done. So then we get to lockdown, and I do a Not a Day project. And I'm sort of playing with different techniques here to see what works, watercolour techniques with ink and whatever. And it's one of those sort of 30-day projects. And I work on this, and partly also, because it's the simple knot, which I've been also commissioned by the Board of Education to do. 5 minutes, great, okay. to do a teaching project all about Archibald Knox's knotwork, and I sort of was just, in order to make it teachable, I take it down to the most basic form, the simple knot, and I'm sort of doing these as a way of inspiring the children that are going to be looking at this project. So anyway, this was then seen by Douglas Borough Council, and they'd had a brief for bright Celtic banners for the refurbishment of Douglas Promenade. Now, Douglas Promenade is 2 miles long, and originally they'd asked for about 30 designs. So I then sort of revisited all of the Celtic stuff and started mining it for little motifs that I could put into sort of long, thin form. And in the end, 11 were chosen. Thank God it wasn't that many. And I did them. And one of the ones that's right, going back to Archibald Knox, because I was looking at the Celtic stones of the island, Archibald Knox and other stories. And this one is the Key Row page from the Deer's Cry. And I used this knot for the yellow banner that you can see in the hall. And yeah, there's 174 banner sites down Douglas Prom. So Douglas Prom's been Nicola Dixon. It's really cool to see. That was a little bit of a view. Another one of the banners was this one, which was inspired by Archibald Knox's grave. And it's cool that one was held within it. So yeah. And here is Knox's grave. Here lies Archibald Knox, humble servant of God in the ministry of the beautiful. So, there we go. That's my talk. Yeah. And I'd also like to thank Manx National Heritage for use of the Deer's Cry images, and the Isle of Man Arts Council for funding me to be here. Thanks, Art. Thank you, and thanks for the invitation. Great.
Thank you, Nicola, and thank you for coming to see us from the Isle of Man, and hope it won't be the last time. And we love the St. Patrick links, and we love that you're wearing your art as well. So thank you very much. I think we'll move on now to Stephen Walker, the last talk of the morning. And Stephen was responsible for the first conference in Andover in 2019. It's been mentioned quite a lot. And he was the driving force really behind getting this event established and supporting it in many ways, not only the first one but this one itself. He really got a book about the Book of Kells at age 11, and the rest is history. So the Book of Kells is kind of a theme running through the morning. It's probably running through the whole conference, actually. Or the Book of Port Mahomet, sorry. I'll get into trouble for that. And was inspired by his art teacher, William Scotty McRae, at school to create his own Celtic art. And since 1984, he's run Walker Metalsmiths with his wife, Sue, who we also welcome today. And he's come along with various colleagues as well. We mentioned Sydney there, whose silver jewellery is on display. And also Christy Woolridge is here, and her husband, Zach. So welcome. So it's a great company, and we keep seeing amazing things coming out of that. He's going to tell you more about that, I think, but today he's going to really talk about one of his favourite subjects, which is the folklore of the Celtic revival.
Thank you. See if I can do this, okay. My experience with Celtic art, my exposure to it really began in 1968 when my grandmother went on a trip to Ireland, Rome, and Israel. And when she came back, she brought me this little souvenir book about the Book of Kells. And this isn't actually it. This is a similar thing that was done later. And so I got this about August of 1968, and I was immediately fascinated with it. The complexity and beauty of the designs, and you know, it really touched a chord with me. And just a few weeks after that, it was the beginning of the fall school term. I went to school, and I met a couple of boys, Rory and Kevin McCrae, and was invited to Kevin's 11th birthday party. And there was his father, who was an art teacher, William Scotty McCrae. And this is on the left is about where he was. I'm going to take about 5 minutes to talk about Scotty, because this conference is sort of dedicated to his memory. He passed away just a little while after the previous conference in Andover. But Scotty was at the end of his driveway painting on the mailbox. And he was painting with thistles and some Ellenseal letters, McCrae, and a little flourish of interlace. And I thought, I know what this is, and I was very excited about it. And then Kevin took me into the house where there's all this sculpture, and I was already excited about Celtic art. Now here's a living practitioner of it. The McCrae house was this old farmhouse. Scotty came from a Scottish family in Niagara Falls, New York. His ancestors were clearance Scots, Gaelic speakers who'd come over, and he was, as a child during World War II, his parents went off to do war service, and he was left with his great-grandmother and his grandmother and his great-aunt, and they owned some property in Alfred, New York, which is right near Andover where I live, and his great-grandmother had bought this old house, which eventually became his home. And here he is with his son as an infant, and one of the older women of the family. But he got the name Scotty as a piper in the U.S. Navy during the Korean War. He was a ship's piper, but he really enjoyed. This is Andover. He came to Alfred, because of this family connection to the home, and then went to Alfred University, got a design degree, and then became a teacher in Andover Central School, which is right there. And my house is right over there somewhere. My mother's house is way over here. So after this introduction, and I met a lot of other people that were very important to me that day. It was really kind of a life-changing day for me. But just a few weeks after that, my family found a home that they wanted on a fall day, much like this. There was some beautiful maple trees glowing in new foliage. So this building right here, the old Methodist church, is where the previous conference was held. Scotty's art was, he did a lot of graphics and prints, but he did a lot of wood carving, and he did what he called assemblages, which were different pieces of wood carved independently and then assembled together, telling a story, usually with sort of a medieval flair, and quite often with some Celtic detail. And this influenced my own work quite a bit, and that I do similar things with my jewelry quite often, where I make things of different pieces that are assembled, and that different colors of metal. Scotty's been very big about passing on the Scottish and Gaelic tradition that was handed down to him, to his children. These are the boys, probably a little before I met them, but his son Alec is also very good. This is Alec. I taught Alec to play bagpipes, and Alec is a very good wood carver himself. I'm really sorry he couldn't be here today, but Scotty had 2 sons and then 5 grandsons, and now he's into the great-grandchildren, some of which live in Andover. But here's some of his more recent work. And then in later years, he moved out of the big old house and built this new house. It's kind of like a Scottish croft house, and a lot of the house is detailed. His sons raise Hieland coos, so it's a very picturesque place. Here he is with his wife, but in the center here he's sitting there holding forth in conversation and imparting sage wisdom, which was really the way a lot of us remember him. And as telling my story, people come to Andover in my store and they say, well, why Andover? Why this Celtic stuff here? And I would tell them what I just told you. And in early 2018, I realized that, this was 50 years ago, almost exactly. And I thought we should commemorate this. So we put together an art exhibit of local artists and craftsmen who were influenced by Scotty, and we had it in my exhibition room in my shop. And this was on the 50th anniversary of me meeting Scotty, but we had nearly 50 people participating as exhibitors. And this whiskey we're using for toasting, Donka's a little bit responsible for that. That whiskey has never been sold. It was donated to the Insular Art Conference for a whiskey reception, and there was a bottle left over, which found its way into my bag afterwards. So, because I did not take it, Donka put it there for me. So anyway, speaking at the conference in 2019, this is where he was pictured. This was in around June 9th, and he really spoke as he often did, and it was kind of like a review of a lot of what he thought and what he's about Celtic art, about the continuation of Celtic culture in the New World. And he passed away in October that year. This monument was one that he, with help of his family and friends, crafted for his wife, who predeceased him by about 10 years. So anyway, I'm very grateful to have the opportunity to talk about him for a few minutes and remember him. His talk at the previous conference is available on YouTube. If you go to YouTube and search on William Scotty McCrae, you'll find it's about 40 minutes, 45 minutes or so. Anyway, the things we say about Celtic art, as artists and craftsmen, we want to create cultural value for what we make. We owe it to our audience to have a good story. Scotty was a very, very good story, but now when I say our audience, that sounds a little better than calling them customers, a little less crass and commercial. So yes, a lot of what I'm going to talk about does involve marketing a little bit, because we think of Celtic art in terms of the sources that come down to us from the past, but the way that it was presented in the 19th century and the way some of the new things that came out in the 19th century were sold it also affects how we understand it, or how we imagine it today. So it's a given that the Celtic style is a reference to the past, and the past comes to us through stories and through surviving artifacts. And we imagine the foundation of our Celtic Renaissance are ancient objects. But what happened, in the things like the Book of Kells or the Ardagh Chalice were a long time ago. And if we were to claim that this is a living tradition, as I'm sure this room is a great testament that it is a living tradition. I think we have to understand what's happened in more recent generations. And my suggestion is that a lot of what happened in the middle of the 19th century and into the early 20th century has a very lot to do with how we understand what we're doing now today. So, when I speak of folklore, I'm really talking about what people say, how we conversationally pass these things on, not how the learned professors and museum curators interpret it based on, provable fact and evidence and things like that, but the things that have kind of, in some cases, are a little more optimistic or a little more fun than some of those. So there's really three sort of narratives to Celtic art that I consider the folklore or the points that we're supposed to. I'm sure all of us have been told this in our introduction to it. One of them is that the Celtic design is almost superhuman complexity or imagination, often expressed in this term, the work of angels. And this can often be imagined that it took a lot more than just practice, that you had to rise to a higher mental state to be able to do this. You had to have years of druidic training or meditation or possibly hallucinogenic drugs to attain this distortion of reality that is presented. And we saw this was before things were coming together with all these how to do it instructions, methods of construction like George Bain or Michael's more recent book, or Aidan Meehan. It was believed that by many people, especially people that hadn't tried it, that you had to have some like almost spiritual guidance. And you'd hear people, Scotty used to imagine that maybe something like automatic writing was happening, kind of more of a mystical, spiritual experience. The other second section of the folklore is that it's all native, that it's all something that is, Ireland and Scotland were never invaded by the Romans. They were, the golden age of Celtic art was before the Anglo-Norman invasion, and therefore this is something that's nationalistic and the essence of the people. And the third thing is that there's a deep and mysterious symbolism in every detail, often expressed as each knot has a meaning. And many of us have been kind of awkwardly had to answer, well, can you tell me what this means? These things were all discussed quite extensively in the early days of archaeology becoming respectable. Etienne Rennes wrote in one of his articles that prior to about 1840, archaeology seemed to be the province of the lunatic fringe or near lunatic fringe, and we do get a lot of very much imagined interpretations of discoveries. But one of the first serious scientifically minded archaeologists was Sir David Wilson, and he wrote this book in 1851. And David Wilson was like a lot of these people. He was a very good artist. This render. Oops. Gotta go back there. This rendering of the Hunterston brooch was his own drawing. But he made the observation in terms of like survival and being a native thing that this tradition of interlaced ornamentation had survived from ancient times right down to the to the time of the Jacobite uprising and the Battle of Culloden. And he also talks about the three-cornered knot, the triquetra, as being a symbol of the Holy Trinity. He discusses that in his book. But he, as he's talking about this later manifestation, I have a brooch here we can pass around. Could you pass this around, please? I know it's kind of dark, but it's, I didn't bring the dirk. That's a part of my collection also. But towards the end, I mean, this was already being used as like a, at this point in, early modern times as being symbolic of, or being emblematic, I guess we should say, of the culture, of the people. And of course the Jacobite movement drew very heavily on Scottish sense of their own separate heritage from the English. One of the things I really love about this dirk is that the interlace is really wrong in many ways. And I think that the reason for this is because at the time there was an increased demand for it. People wanted this kind of thing. It was, it's a weapon, so it's associated with the rebellion, but it's, there probably weren't enough people that really knew how to do it right, but so they just did the best they could. And actually, the interlace on the brooch is kind of similar. Most of us would probably do it a little better than that. So, here's some sculptural examples from that same later period, previous to the Jacobite movement. But these are things from the West Highland School. But these illustrations are from the same period as archaeology is getting serious about examining these things. And one of the themes in a lot of these books is that this stuff has been neglected too long. And in the previous generations, say the late 18th century, early 19th century, a lot of the illustrations were pretty bad. George Bain covers some of them. But at this time, at the same time that the archaeology is coming out, there's sort of a commercial exploitation of it. And objects like this, here's another brooch to pass around. This is the one that's being illustrated here. This was the Cavan brooch, of course. The original medieval one was, 7th or 8th century, or possibly even a little earlier. But it was being reproduced in Dublin by West and Company in 1849. And it was being done actually using the highest technology of the time. It was, this is an electrotype, which is a way you make a mold and then you deposit metal from a solution. It's like electroplating, except you're electroplating into the mold and building up thick layers, and then you solder the two halves together. So this is pretty much like the 19th century version of a 3D printer would be today. And sometimes this is referred to as the Queen's pattern brooch because they gave one of these to Queen Victoria when she visited Dublin in 1849. She also notoriously autographed the Book of Kells in 1849, which drew more attention to the Book of Kells than it probably had ever previously had, because the visit was covered in mass media. It was in London Illustrated News, and people all around the world were learning about the Book of Kells as they read about this celebrity visit. Now, this excitement about historic, antiquarian objects and in new recent archaeological discoveries is what's known as the Tara brooch, although it was nowhere near Tara. It is. This was discovered in 1850 and was being manufactured by George Waterhouse, the firm of Waterhouse and Company in Dublin, the same year. and they were exhibiting it at the Crystal Palace exposition in London in 1851. So they were using, again, the highest technology available at the time to make dies to stamp these things. And I've got one of those to pass around too. They made thousands of them. I mean, they're quite collectible, but and you can kind of pass these to the back, and my wife will collect them. There's going to be 3, okay? Yeah, I brought my roadies here to enforce this. So nobody can leave until we've got 3. So anyhow, these were promoted brilliantly. I mean, they were sold in urban department stores. They were, advertised in magazines and print, mass media, exhibited in World's Fairs, and they were very much a commercial success. And what they said about them was probably, George Petrie gave a great paper to the Royal Irish Academy about the tar brooch after he'd had a chance to examine it, although Waterhouse owned it himself for the next 20 years. But as probably what he said about it had less of an influence on the popular perception of this stuff than what Waterhouse had to say about it. As what Petrie said had less influence than what Waterhouse did. And what he was telling is, this is a great symbol, status symbol that the princes and chieftains of ancient Ireland would wear. So now another artist author is Henry O'Neill, who is most famous for his book on the high crosses. He did a book with 36 lithographs. And he was also very much associated with the Young Ireland movement, which was, the Young Ireland movement was really focusing quite a lot on art as a evidence of Ireland's sophistication in former times. So there was a little bit of a political and propaganda agenda going on with a lot of this. Henry O'Neill wrote 4 books. I think only 3 of them ever made it to completion. They all had Ireland in the title, and his book on crosses did something that I think is really significant, in that he did a lot of these exploded views where he just showed a detail. And we've all seen books like this where a single detail is taken out and looked at. And I think that this skews people's idea of it a little bit, because you see a certain single piece and you think of that as maybe looking more like a symbol than if it's just part of the overall program. But that's a little side for now. But yeah. Oh, sorry. Thank you. He wrote a book on the fine arts and civilization of Ireland, and he had very little to say about symbolism, other than say that the cross was a symbol, which obviously it is. He didn't use the word Celtic very much either. To him, this was Irish. Everything was Irish. He was very much his third book, which was not about art, was Ireland for the Irish, I think was the title of it. And it was, it was a proposal of a political solution. But if the first thing is, okay, Irish art has not had that much attention, but it's excellent. Pretty much all the books that were coming out to inform people of Celtic art or Irish art at the time would really emphasize how unique and sophisticated and beautiful it was. And then we've all heard how the Celtic cross is pagan. It has pagan origins. Well, I've been looking, trying to find out how far does that concept go back? What's the earliest citation you can find? Actually, Henry O'Neill's writing. I think it was probably around a little before that. The peculiar form of the Irish cross is heathen, and it was a sacred symbol to the pagans. He really went overboard on this in both of his books. And then this other thing, that the Irish art must have been cultivated for centuries before the Book of Kells could have been produced, is unquestionable in his mind. And it must have existed for hundreds of years before Christianity. And this is it's a very common point of view. Although if you go to the Insular Art Conferences, picking everything apart, and this is from here and there. This is a good example of one of the forms of evidence. I mean, this is a very old piece. It's a cross within a circle, and things like this were believed to be sun symbols and offered as a in support of this idea of the cross, Celtic cross being a pagan thing. This is the most famous of Henry O'Neill's images. This is from his book on high crosses. Henry O'Neill kind of fell out of favor with the mainstream scholarship of he had a big feud with George Petrie. In fact, his book on art and culture had a chapter that was called Dr. Petrie's Errors. And that feud didn't go very well for poor Henry. But anyway, this piece, I think it's just because it's such a beautiful composition, has been reused many times, and I doubt if anyone here is seeing the image for the first time. But one of the great things with modern technology is you can colorize a black and white image, and you can fill in some of the details. So we did a little thing with that. So just this guy here. So anyway, this book here, which I'm holding a copy of, is the Cromlech on Howth. And this kind of this is a bit of a breakout piece, I believe, in terms of this period, because this was created not so much as a publication to inform you, but as a beautiful object in its own way. You buy it. This is a coffee table book, really. This is a very beautiful thing. The covers, nicely embossed and gilded, and then a lot of the detail is copied from the Book of Kells. It is really a collaboration between three people. Samuel Ferguson was a poet. He was one of the first poets that really did a lot of work to translate the heroic cycle into English. The old bardic tales, and then it was also with drawings from nature by. Oops, we have this monogram here, MS, which we know now is Margaret Stokes, and then notes on Celtic ornament, revised by George Petrie. That's a little confusing, but if you think of these people are all three different generations. They're it's kind of a wonderful project. It's pretty well understood that Margaret Stokes was trying to sort of downplay her role, being identified as a woman for a serious project like this. It might not have been taken as seriously, although she was a very privileged person. Her father was Dr. William Stokes, who was very good friends with George Petrie. She had access to all this stuff, and later in life she became Dr. Petrie's. She took care of his papers after he died, finished a lot of his projects, edited things, and then by the time of her own death, she was recognized as possibly the leading expert of her generation. But this is her drawing from life of the Cromlech, or also known as dolmens, or in those days they were often called Druids' altars. Because it's collapsed, it's maybe not quite as classic, but that's but here's the opening part of the poem, and the poem it's about Oisin giving the funeral ode to Aideen, the daughter of Angus, who has died of grief after her husband Oscar was killed in battle. And you can see as it goes down here, they're evoking the Dadonan Druids' sleep in the landscape. And you see this letter T, makes sense. And there's this column here of interlaced figures, which if you might wonder, what does that have to do with what's going on here? Here is the Book of Kells source of these two things. And this says, if we could read Latin, it would say, then Jesus was led by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. It's from the book of Matthew. And then this is the letter B. It's BA2, BA2, BA2. Blessed are the poor in spirit. This is the Beatitudes all on. There's 8 Beatitudes, just like there's 8 stanzas in St. Patrick's breastplate. So if we compare these, I don't think it really has much to do with this at all, other than it is a beautiful relic of the Irish past that's being used along with a couple of other things from the Irish past. The cromlech itself is a very impressive monument, although they're from like 4000 BC, 4500 BC. Don't really know if they understood they were that old at that time. And then you've got this literary bardic tradition that's another culturally beautiful and important thing. So they're combining all these glories of the past into one object. And they're also doing something else that's kind of interesting. I don't know how clearly you can read that, but if you look, they're using the love of ornament, it would seem, but it's got that long S that looks like the letter F. This style of typesetting had gone out of use about 1805. This is 60 years after that kind of, this is an archaic way of doing it. Just one more way of making this look older, make this reference to the past. Another little interesting thing is, there's a footnote here from Fraser's Magazine in August of 1862. Now, the publication date was 1861, so this is evidence of the Celtic gift of clairvoyance. So, now, the revised notes do address all 3 of the points of my, where are we at here? 5 minutes, okay. There is the triquetra, which he discusses, but then suggests that it's a symbol of the Holy Trinity. Native origin. They go on about spirals more so than interlace, and that I think there's more solid evidence that certainly that is. It is agreed that it is certainly true that that's a native thing. And then also Gerald of Wales, his thing of it being a result of angelic rather than human skill. Now, Romley Allen, who was writing around about 1900, he was very much scientific about his approach, and he expressed some doubt about the triquetra being a Trinity symbol. But I can see that by just the design of his book, people were tending to see he had all these little breakout things here like this, and they, if you didn't read this and study it, you just glance at it and you'd think, well, he's showing maybe these different things have some kind of different meaning. But because the triquetra was seen as being a nameable symbol and having a very specific meaning, I think a lot of people jumped to the conclusion that all these little details had similar meaning. But Romley Allen did suggest that maybe on this one picture stone from Meagle, that maybe it was a Trinity symbol there. And I think his argument is because it was on the symbol side of the stone rather than, on the more ornamental side where the cross is the major symbol. But a generation later, François Henri was suggesting that it was indeed a Trinity symbol here on this stone from Donegal. But my own opinion, this is probably the closest we have from ancient times of seeing it, seeing the triquetras by itself. It's not completely by itself, but we never do really see it standing alone. But Archibald Knox, I think, really did something perhaps unintentionally in terms of shifting our ideas of how things worked, and that his, he's breaking these things free. He's showing very simple knots, and his brooches are the shape of a knot. His jewelry is the shape of this, what would be an ornament applied to something like the Tara brooch is the piece itself. And worn that way, it looks more symbolic. And certainly people do that. Now, are we to see a Celtic Renaissance? What do you think? So, again, George Bain, he's bringing the Druids back into it again. He's sort of insinuating that the art was a Druidic thing. He was less of he was an art teacher. He was about the art. Okay, pretty close, huh? But he kind of combined. This is carpet he did, sort of a sampler. You've got people here from, the early medieval Pictish period, and then these sort of Jacobite guys, and they're participating in the same activity. What did you say we had left here? 0? Okay, I'll quickly flash through. But continuum was one of his big, he was a champion of the idea that continuous knots were more important, and that the idea of the eternity knot or something like that. But as you see the triquetra in more recent times being used as a piece of jewelry by itself, or in this case as an architectural detail, and not to turn this into a hostage situation, but this is keep you from your lunch, but this is a church in Ann Arbor, Michigan, where it's clearly is being used as a Trinity symbol there. And the idea, if it wasn't in medieval times, doesn't mean it can't be today, as well as other imaginative use. All in favor of that. But in delving into this book, it says indeed the interlacing and plating so common in Celtic ornament seem to be an effort to express and create a sense of difficulty and something intricate yet not confused. In their entangled coils and infinite windings and their strange knotting and network, they form indeed fit symbols of the inexplicable mystery of our faith and our life. And statements like these, I think, are something that many of us may use. And this, I have my own little commercial, as Donka did. It was brought to you by Walker's Celtic Jewelry. So anyway, I thank you for
Thank you very much, Stephen. Before I thank you and everyone else properly this morning, I have a little thing I'd like to do, is to thank Claire Torrens. I think she's still here. Yeah? Is Claire here? Yes. Claire has really been a huge help in preparing the centre and the conference for us, and has found funding for us and organised a programme, and even our T-shirts and every detail really, and also her colleagues, but especially Claire. So I'd like to make a little presentation. Okay, well, thank you very much, and we're really grateful for your help to get this up and running, and the centre has just been a great venue. So yes, your reference to Henry Neale reminded me of Peter Harbison's book about him. And I wanted to thank Danica for paying tribute to Peter Harbison. He was a great mentor of mine in the various projects that I picked up with high crosses. You know, he was a great source of support and inspiration. And of course, he wrote our book about the high crosses of County Down. I also wanted to pay tribute to Rosemary Cramp, who also passed away very sadly recently. We've lost two major, legendary figures really in insular art and sculpture. And Rosemary taught me early medieval art at Durham University about 35 years ago, 1988. So it was very sad news as well. So thanks to them for helping us to understand our early medieval Celtic art. Okay, so a wonderful morning. I don't think we have time for questions this morning. So what we're going to do, it's not even morning anymore, I know that. We're going to have lunch. We'll reconvene at 2 o'clock to hear Cynthia's talk about key pattern, and that'll round off wonderfully the 3 days of talks. And what we'll do is after Cynthia's talk, we'll go on until 3 o'clock, and we'll have everybody up for questions, okay? So we can bring everybody together properly. So I hope that will work. And then at 3 o'clock we'll have the workshops and the meet the artists and all the things going on in the gallery. So that'll be quite a nice afternoon. And that can go on. It doesn't have to stop at 4:30. You can go on a little bit longer. They close at 5. So we might have to drag you away from your key pattern just before 5 o'clock. So thank you to all the speakers this morning. And what a wonderful selection of talks. We're looking forward to questioning them about their talks later on. Okay. Do you have okay?